Welcome to the Big Brown Gadfly, which remember now has a Spanish name, El Tábano de Atenas, because I have a Spanish show called El Tábano de Atenas, which is the Spanish version of the Big Brown Gadfly. And that's going to be on a Roku channel, Brighteon TV en Español. So you might want to check that out at some point. But I'm still doing this Big Brown Gadfly show here with my good friend, Jeff Dornik, who is the CEO of Gatekeepers. And he's going to join me today for a talk about how liberty hijacked morality. And so hopefully this will be a ranging discussion of one of the big problems that Christian conservatives face, which is the fact that often people who are fighting in our name and claiming to speak for us are using terms without really telling us what they mean. And so religious liberty is a major pitfall that I want to talk about. Thank you very much for joining me, Jeff. How are you doing?
I'm doing really good. Thanks for having me back on.
Yes, of course. Well, I am excited to have my book come out soon, Cancel Proof Christianity, which is going to be available on gatekeepersonline.com. But I have gone through several stages of reactions to this Supreme Court ruling, this historic ruling, Dobbs versus the Jackson Women's Health Organization. I was doing victory laps and celebrating, and I was really happy about it. And then I started reading the decision, and then I read more of the decision, and then I finished the whole thing. And I see a lot of problems. I see a lot of problems, not just with the Dobbs decision, but more specifically with the reaction in right-wing circles to this decision. They are all taking this as an unequivocal win, and I am glad that we are seeing reports that there are some states where abortion clinics have closed. Now, remember that most abortions nowadays are done with pills. They're done with medication that induces the abortion. So even in some of those states where the abortion clinics have closed, there's still going to be those medical abortions taking place. But more importantly, what the decision did was it did not ban abortion. It didn't agree with people who say that abortion was murder. It didn't confer upon the unborn human rights at all. It actually retreated even further from settling any of those questions by saying the Supreme Court does not have the power or the ability to make moral questions of that magnitude. It sent the question back to the states. So it said that each state has their own right to decide when people become human over the course of a pregnancy and whether abortion is murder. So what that means is that if Texas, for instance, undergoes a series of elections and we elect Democrats and they decide that abortion will be legal up until the point of birth in Texas, all of the progress that we got with Dobbs versus the Jackson Women's Health Organization is gone, right, Jeff?
Oh yeah. Right. The thing is that we gained from that perspective on defining when life begins. We didn't gain any ground. We didn't win any argument, and we didn't change any minds. We didn't really change laws from that standpoint. So it's an important distinction that we have to make. At best, it was a procedural. Just had nothing to do with abortion in and of itself.
Right. I think that what it did was it overturned Roe versus Wade. So that's a good thing. What it meant is that no longer do we have that judicial precedent hanging over us. But in a lot of ways, we went backward. And one of the reasons why I say that is because Roe versus Wade put the focus on viability. It said ultimately that there were 3 trimesters, and they came up with this system really without having been asked to come up with any system. As the Dobbs decision pointed out, the Roe versus Wade just invented their own benchmarks, right? So one of the things that Roe versus Wade did was it said, okay, at what point in the course of a pregnancy does the fetus become viable? When is it able to live outside of the mother's body? Now, that's not a good benchmark, but at the very least, what it was doing was it was focusing the conferral of rights upon some determination as to when a person becomes a living, independent being, right? So what the Supreme Court did in Dobbs was it just retreated from that question. It said, that doesn't concern us. Every state can decide that on their own. And they did that knowing that there are many states that don't believe that even a born child has a right to life, right? That
Yeah.
at 9 months you could abort a child and you could kill it even if it's born live, and you wouldn't have any criminal penalties for it. So I think that there were some problems with that decision. You see what I'm saying, Jeff?
Yeah, well, to me, it's a very dangerous very dangerous precedent when we do this idea of them saying that we can't decide when life begins, because at what point does that line of argumentation end? Does it end at birth, or are we leaving that up to the states as well? Are we leaving that up
Yes.
to? Are we leaving that up to a 3? Does the mother have the right to kill their 3-year-old child? Should that be left up to the state of California, or should that fall under the Constitution of the right to life? And that's the problem when the court is backing away from that now basically taking away their constitutional authority to protect your right to life. They're saying, no, we're wiping our hands clean. We're going to throw it back to you. It's almost like Pontius Pilate in the Bible when he washed his hands of saving Christ, and he's like, no, this is on you guys. It's on you guys. It's the exact same thing that the Supreme Court did.
Yeah, that is the issue that I take with this, is the basic fact that I don't think that you can say that each of the states can have a different definition of murder. Murder has to be a consistent thing across the whole Constitution. The 14th Amendment, even if there were doubts before you get to the deep amendments to the Constitution, the 14th Amendment clearly says that on matters like this, you have to have equal protection under the law. I can't have legal protection against murder in Alabama, but not in California. That does not make sense. So the logic behind this is very poor. There are 4 points that I wanted to go over today to kind of help people see this. One of which is, why didn't they call it murder? You have 213 pages in this decision. They went to the great lengths to attach every single statewide law that dealt with abortion up until 1900. All of that is amended into this decision, but they never came and said abortion is the taking of a life. They said some people feel that way. They said the state has an interest in deciding that, but the court declined to say that abortion is murder. Okay, so that is the first problem that I see with this decision. The second is, this decision, I believe, is lying about the Constitution. And I think the conservative movement is lying about the Constitution. Everywhere I go, people are saying this is this great victory for the Constitution because the courts were not supposed to dictate morality. Okay, the Constitution has 7 articles. The 3rd article delineates what the Supreme Court is supposed to do. It defines the judiciary, and it says that they have judicial power over fact and law. The Constitution opens with a preamble that says the purpose of the entire document, the whole purpose of the federal government, is to create a better society. It's a more perfect union, to ensure domestic tranquility, to establish justice, to and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. What are the other? There are 6 there. And so all of those, justice is not a neutral standard. This is not just a procedural document. The purpose of it is to create a better society, and the good in that society is something that has a pre-existing benchmark. The language of the Bible is implicit. Even if they're not saying we're going to the Bible, the moral worldview that they inherited from the Christian Bible is there. When they say ensure domestic tranquility or secure the blessings of liberty to our posterity, I'm hearing Deuteronomy 11, where God says, I'm giving you a blessing and a curse. The idea that if you do things the right way as a society, I will bless your posterity. If you don't, I'm cursing your posterity. So the Constitution is not a morally neutral document. The Supreme Court is there to have opinions on fact and law. So when life begins is a fact, and murder is against the law in every state of the union. So I just don't buy this argument that the right thing to do is to give this back to the states for people to decide. It's also very disingenuous because the Supreme Court justices know that we're going to be wasting our time trying to lobby every single state capital. I mean, everyone knows what state legislatures are like. that it's kind of an insult to all the people who have been fighting all these years to fight against abortion. The problem number 3 that I want to go over is the gender imbalance problem. Okay, here's the thing. We have enough scientific evidence to be able to define life as beginning at conception. I'm going to go over that to explain why we have the evidence to say that life begins at conception, and then after that point, it is murder. If you don't start with conception, you're looking at a window of when life begins at a moment when there's only 2 human beings present, the baby and the mother. The father's not there. We don't hear the sperm brought up almost at all in any of this. And so we're going to talk about why it is dangerous to cast this question as only being between the life of the child or the liberty of the mother. If you eliminate the father, there's some problems there. And lastly, I want to talk about why religious liberty, which has been the mantra that we've been hearing from the conservative movement for so long, has really distorted our discussion. How to say that you are defending the religious liberty of Christians is not the same thing as defending traditional Christian values. Those are 2 different things, and we have to talk about that. So first, let's talk about why not call it murder. Okay, so Jeff, what would it take for someone at the federal level to establish for us that, in fact, it is murder to end the life of an unborn human? What would they need for us to get clarification at the federal level for that?
I mean, we already have all of the evidence. We already have all the science. We already have all the like, that's the thing. But what they're choosing to do is they're choosing to kowtow to the left and to the atheistic worldview that dominates the Democrat Party and the Republican Party. And I think that that's a very important thing that we have to understand in all of this. The reason you have these supposedly conservative judges that are making this kind of argumentation, like you're saying, it's very problematic, is because are kowtowing to the atheistic worldview, which denies the very existence of God. This is a major problem. That the Republican Party is that they're trying to make all of these arguments without bringing up God, bringing up the Bible, and that's a very, very problematic, very difficult thing to do. But then also just getting down to this very issue is that it seems to me that they are afraid of the pro-baby murder crowd. They're very afraid of the pro-abortion plan because, hey, they are very powerful. They have a lot of money. They've got lobbyists. They've got, millions, if not billions of dollars that can throw at things and influencing, and they're very afraid of that group. And so it's a difficult thing. All it would take, to be honest, would be to have somebody with a spine that would actually boldly declare the truth. These people claim to be pro-life, but are they really? If this is the kind of art of argumentation that they're using, like, to me, you're looking at this and you're looking at it. If you believe that life begins at conception, then that means take that life. It is murder. If you intentionally take that life, that is murder. There is no in between. There is no well. 6 weeks, 16 weeks. It's either life or not. You have to make a decision.
Right. Well, here's the thing. Okay, so you have the biblical definition of murder, which comes from the Psalms, where it says that God knits us together in our womb fearfully and wonderfully. Okay, and that is combined with Exodus 20:13, which says, "Thou shalt not kill." All right. And then the Bible also gives us the part where Jesus says in Matthew 19, he repeats Genesis and he says, what God has brought together, let no man tear asunder. He repeats the idea that sexual union is when 2 become 1. So he says the man and the woman coming together, that is a union. The reason why divorce is immoral is because they come together. And that connects to the idea that the baby is knit together in the womb because the mother and the father, their essences are combined and they become one. That's the biblical view. Now, prior to the advent of modern science, people just had the biblical view. They didn't know certain things that then ended up affirming that. Okay, so let me just go over this a little bit. In 1628, William Harvey discovered the circulation of the blood. He figured out that what is inside of us, it circulates, that fluids move throughout our body. They're not just standing still, okay? That was important because then in the 1660s, Robert Hooke discovered the cell. Prior to that, they didn't know that life was composed of cells that are contained. units, and that and eventually they discovered through microbiology that there are living beings that are only one cell. Okay. And then in 1876, the Hertwig brothers discovered the zygote. So they realized that at the moment of conception, and they kind of had the basic idea of genetics there. So then with the discovery of DNA, they figured out that at the moment of conception, you have the emergence of one cell. All of us were at one point one cell that had the complete set of DNA. So to me, the Bible gives us that definition and science affirms it. I think the Catholics have confused this because they start talking about contraception and masturbation and oral sex and all of these things as if all non-procreative activity is the same as abortion. And I'm saying it's not, because life begins at that moment of conception because you have a complete set of DNA. That's going to be the DNA for that person forever. And we know from biology that that one cell is us. So if you kill that one cell, you're killing us. And so people who don't want to look at the science, who want to do it based on, well, that doesn't look like a person to me, I can't really take that seriously, then of course it's going to get murky, because at what point does the fetus look like you? You can't say viability, because obviously babies are not viable even when they're born. They can't live on their own. They're dependent. So they had the evidence to call it murder. They did not have to refrain from that. And I feel like this evidence has been presented to them over and over and over again. And this is a pattern where the left likes to reduce everything to a biblical argument, because then they can say, well, I don't agree with the Bible, so therefore I'm going to throw that out. Well, the problem is the science backs up the Bible. So what do you agree with? Are you just playing God? You're saying it doesn't look like life to me, so therefore it's not life. That does not make any sense.
Well, and also, like, there's no consistency in the left's argumentation. They refuse to define what life is, because I've heard a lot of people say that, when they're talking about viability, it's the baby is, or they refer to it as the fetus, but I always refer to it as the baby. When the baby is reliant upon the mother for all the nutrients and oxygen and all that, it's like, okay, so my wife and I, we recently had a baby, right? And the baby is attached to the umbilical after the baby comes out, right? So, and for a lot of people, they actually do delayed cord clamping. The baby could actually be outside of the womb for up to a half an hour, sometimes longer, still attached to the mother through the umbilical cord. Is that baby not? Even though the baby's outside of the mother, but the baby's still attached, relying upon the mother for, even at that moment, still oxygen, nutrition, still getting blood flow, all that kind of stuff. Is that baby technically, according to the left, alive or dead? Do you have the right to murder that baby if it's outside the womb but still attached to the umbilical cord? Because that's their line of argumentation. But they can't be consistent, because nobody would say, here's a baby in your arms, you can still murder it, except some extreme wacko lefties.
But I think this Supreme Court decision puts us on the road to people in those states doing that, because they have basically, the Supreme Court has said, we wash our hands of it. If California wants to say you can kill a 3-year-old because it's not viable, that language even appears in the decision if you read it, because Alito, when he's talking about the viability argument and why they threw it out, he said that there were people who could argue that up until you're in nursery school, you're not viable as a human being. But he doesn't jump in and say, so therefore we have to say that in the law of the land, that logic is completely illegal. He doesn't say that. Instead, he kind of gives them free rein if they want to, in the future, at some point, say it's legal to kill a 3-year-old, they can do it. This is why I don't think this is a good decision. I'm glad that we're celebrating that Roe versus Wade was overturned, but the decision is very problematic. And I think that brings me to the next point, which I want to talk about with you, which is that I am really worried, because I really feel like conservatives right now are not understanding the Constitution. And that's not good, because our movement always bills itself as, we're the constitutional party, we're the people who know this document really well. But I just don't understand why they think that the Supreme Court does not have the right to say when life begins. Why do conservatives believe that the Constitution forbids us from having a nationwide definition of murder. I don't. We had Articles of Confederation for half of the 1780s. The reason why we have our Constitution and the reason why we formed a federal government was because it didn't work to have all states with separate currency, separate laws, separate standards, all of them signing contracts or treaties with other. We couldn't. That didn't work. The Articles of Confederation failed. They couldn't even provide for veterans of the Revolutionary War. We do have a national system. There are some things that are national standards. Slavery, obviously, was something that it didn't work to say some states could have this and others couldn't, and the 14th Amendment clearly says it doesn't matter where you live in on basic issues of life, liberty, and property. Like, you have to have a national standard. Why are conservatives saying this? I feel like I'm living in crazy land. Can you explain this to me, Jeff? Where are they getting this from?
Well, so it comes back to everybody looks at everything from a very superficial standpoint, and we've been trained by big tech, social media, the mainstream media, just to look at headlines, just to look at like taglines, just to look at the easy things without actually diving into the details. And I think that's the hard part especially when we're dealing with constitutional arguments. It's become the slogan of conservatives for the longest time. Oh, limited government, small government. But what does that mean? Is that in circumstance? Is that in particular circumstances? Because there is a role for a bigger federal government in certain areas. It's just in general we should have limited. But I think we take these slogans to an extreme, to the point to where we don't actually understand what we're saying. We're just saying, oh, states' rights. Well, does the state always have the right to supersede the federal government? No, there's circumstances where the federal government has authority over the states, and that's delegated by the Constitution. Well, guess what? This is one of those things that should be delegated to the federal government to protect life from conception, because it's provable that life begins at conception. This should be protected by the federal government. This should not be up to the individual states to make this decision.
I'm so glad that you were saying this, because I feel like I'm crazy, because I hear all of these conservatives who are saying, this is something that the states have to decide. They have to make this up. Okay, so the 6 parts of the preamble, I remembered them now. It's in order to form a more perfect union, to provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, ensure domestic tranquility, secure the blessings to ourselves and our posterity. And then there's one more that I can't, but I had them all listed in the article that I wrote. But those are to promote the general welfare, to provide for the common defense. All of these things point to the fact that the Constitution is a moral document. There is a moral vision for the country. I found one quote in the research that I did for the article that I'm going to be publishing on Gatekeepers. Robert George, who is someone who is constantly quoted everywhere, I think he got this wrong. He basically, he didn't get this wrong. He was refuting the people who got it wrong. There was a common conservative refrain that when it comes to ideas of what is the good, that is something that the government can't try to define for people. That's not true. The preamble of the Constitution says it right there. We want a country that promotes the general welfare, that is blessed, and that has a posterity to bless, and that we provide for the common defense. So there is a moral component to it. Article 1 is the legislature, Article 2 is the presidency, and Article 3 is the judiciary. What is the judiciary supposed to do? They have judicial power. It's all about checks and balances. Didn't you learn this in civics class, Jeff? We all learned this in civics class. So they each have a role. So I feel like if you're a judge and you don't have an opinion on something that has been brought before you, you're not doing your job. In fact, I would even say that this is a violation of the whole country's First Amendment rights to petition the government. If we can't bring this to the Supreme Court and say, decide this for us, like what if murder is against the law everywhere in the country, and we can't decide for ourselves when life begins, so we don't know what murder is, that you have to decide that for us because you have jurisdiction over fact and law. That's what the Constitution says. I don't see a case there for what Alito did. I feel like he just passed the buck. He's like refusing to do his job. I mean, am I getting this wrong? Or, how do you look at this?
No, for me, it's one of those concerns because I live out here in communist California, where immediately Gavin Newsom and all of his henchmen come out and say we're going to defend abortion and women's whatever, redefining what women's rights even are, and they're like, we're going to ensure that abortion is available to everybody, and that if you're in a where abortion is banned, you can come to our state and get abortions basically all the way up until birth. I wouldn't be surprised if we go till after birth. So what we're looking at, though, specifically here is because the federal government and because the Supreme fusing to designate what is considered a life, how do we know what is life and what isn't life that is protected? Because the Constitution and our founding documents clearly say that we have the right to life. We have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. We have that right.
Yeah.
So the problem that we have here is, how do we know who actually has that right? Because we all know up until the 1860s, Black people did not have that constitutional right, even though the Constitution clearly said essentially every man, woman, and child, everybody actually has the right to life. And I believe that it was a direct violation of the Constitution that we were not extending that to every single man, woman, and child.
Yeah.
And so now we are. And we're back to where we were for the first 100-odd years of the founding of our country. We don't know the constitutional right to life because it's not defined anywhere.
Yeah, these are cliches that conservatives have trafficked in, and I think that they've lost control of the language. They don't even understand what they're saying sometimes when they're talking about the fact that we have to throw this back to the states for them to decide this. This is exactly what happened in slavery, that you and it doesn't work. I mean, ultimately it does not work, because if someone is a citizen of the United States, they can't be subject to murder, because the whole country then is going to be thrown into chaos. So there's a big problem with that. And we're going to get to more of that when I get to point number 4 about why religious liberty has hijacked the whole discussion. I want to talk about the gender imbalance problem. And here's what I found when I was doing the research for the article that I'm going to be putting up on gatekeepers. I've been hearing all these people say that women tend to be more pro-choice or pro-life than men. That's actually not true. In the Gallup polling, women by far are more pro-choice. 61% of women are pro-choice, whereas for men, only 48% of them are pro-choice. 47% of men are pro-life, whereas only 31% of women are pro-life. So one of the things that came up in the dissent from Kagan, Sotomayor, and from Breyer was that it's a woman's issue, that the fact that the 14th Amendment was passed by men, not by women. And so, of course, they didn't talk about abortion because men wouldn't understand it. Here's the thing, all right? Any feminist would agree that men and women are shaped by their experience. And so if you look at the experience that men have in the world, is it that men want to control women's bodies? Is that why they are more pro-life? Or is it because our experience is different than women's? We more of us are in 93% of prisoners are men. We're the only ones that can get drafted against our will and forced to serve in the military. Almost 12,000 men were murdered in 2020. Only 3,500 women were. Men are not put in situations where their gross discomfort, their risk to their safety is something that allows them to get out of things that they don't want to do. 85% of child support cases involve the mother having custody and the man providing child support. I don't think that men need to be more like women. I don't think that women need to be more like men. But what we do need is, when we talk about abortion, men have to have a stake in the discussion. That's gender balance. You have to have the woman's perspective and the men's perspective. Women have experienced life where people take their discomfort, their inconveniences much more seriously than they do for men. What do they tell men if you're like, I don't want to do this? They tell them to suck up and go do it, right? Whereas women, we tend to be more concerned for women, and that's fine. We have two genders and they experience things differently. If you define life as beginning after conception, then in your mind, there's only two competing interests involved, which is the life of the fetus versus the liberty of the mother. The father's not part of that. And the Constitution, I mean, the decision that was put down by Alito, he perpetuates this situation because he reduces the calculation to the fetus versus the mother. And so there is no father figure in this. If it's between an adult woman and a fetus, which people dismiss as a clump of cells, of course, the mother's interests are going to win time and again. And unfortunately, women, 61% of them are pro-choice. Overwhelmingly, women are going to say that if it's going to cause gross discomfort for the mother, if it's going to entail risks and pain and hardship for the mother, her interests are going to outweigh the fetus's because they're coming at it from a woman's point of view. And that's the problem that I have with this. I think that, is there any way to have the male perspective included in this if in fact we define it? What's that sound? Is that your?
Yeah, I think there's somebody doing construction outside.
Oh,
Super
okay.
fun.
All right, I'm gonna mute you for 1 second. Is there any way to be able to define or to look at abortion with the male perspective included if in fact we're saying that life begins after conception? Because then really there's two interests. There's the mother and the child, right? Am I getting this wrong, or what do you think?
No, I think you're getting it right. I think there's a couple different ways that I think we can look at it. Number one is just strictly from like a legal perspective. Let's take the atheistic approach. Let's take religion out of it, morality out of it, all that kind of stuff. Strictly from a legal perspective, the father does have a legal stake in this because there is more often than not required child support if it's a single mother or there's a divorce or something along those lines. So there is a financial aspect to this that is thrust upon the fathers that is not put on to mother. We can talk about the discomfort and the physical aspect, but there is, for me looking at this, there is a legal aspect of this as well, where the father's stake in the conversation as well. But then one of the interesting things I had on Dr. Mark Sherwood on my podcast, I want to say about a week or two ago, it was right after the decision, and one of the things that he brought up was he said he was the product. So his mother was 16 years old when she had him. His mother was raped, and he's the product of rape. His mother ended up putting him up for adoption and all of that. And he makes the case. He's like, so what all these people say, even when you're talking about like exception clauses and in the case of rape and all that kind of stuff, he's like, so what you're saying is I didn't have the right to life. So a lot of these pro-lifers, they'll even talk about, exceptions for incest and rape and go along those lines. He's like, so what you're saying is me, I'm now an adult, but he's like, when I was conceived, what you're saying is I didn't have the right to life because of how I was conceived. He's like, I should have the same right to life that somebody else had. He's like, I'm my own person. I didn't make a decision how I was conceived. And I think that this comes down to, we have to be consistent in our argumentation. And so when we're talking about does a man have the right or the authority to speak into these issues? Number one, yes, because you're looking held, and it's a 50-50 shot that it's a man or a woman. Number two, you're looking at the financial aspect, the legal aspect of the role of the father, which we put and we force onto the fathers of, especially if they're not married, along those lines. But then also too, this is the offspring of both the mother and the father.
Yeah,
it takes both.
Yeah,
it's not just one.
That's why I think conception has to be we have to define it as conception, as the beginning of life. But because at the moment of conception, the man and woman they're connected. I mean, they're physically intertwined. And so if you put it afterwards, if you start life, you say, well, life begins at 4 months, the dad might be there, the dad might not. And so that kind of gives it also, in the cases of rape and incest, I mean, ultimately, if everything is between the mother's interest and the child's interests, the fact that you have so much removed the father out of the equation means that the rapist is not even accountable for what he just did. Yeah. You know what I mean? So it does, I think, contribute to rape culture. So that's one of the big problems I found with this decision, is that it continued that. Now the last point, and this one I kind of want to look at a little bit in depth, is the religious liberty trick. Okay. I have realized, and I did a huge deep dive on religious liberty. There was a scholar named Andrew Lewis, who in 2014, he pointed out that there had already been a shift from the 90s to the 2010s where conservatives stopped defending their values and they started fighting for religious freedom. What did that mean when it went from defending your values to religious freedom? It meant that, number one, you put all of your arguments into a relativist framework. You just want to have the right to have this opinion, which implicitly, it retreats from the absolute nature of your opinions. It means that you don't think that your opinion's actually right. It's an option that you might believe this and someone else might believe something else. So it makes everything relativist. But also what it did was it ended up allowing all of the energy behind social conservatism to go towards libertarianism.
Yep.
Because what the major victories of religious liberty or of freedom of conscience were Citizens United, which allowed 501c4s to be able to have unrestricted fundraising opportunities. Burwell versus Hobby Lobby, which gave a corporation the right to deny contraceptive or to not pay for insurance policies that provided contraceptive to people. Burwell versus Wheaton College, which gave Christian colleges the right to hire and fire and do all these things without any interference from the government. And then the Masterpiece Cake case, which basically, this was a business owner who didn't want to make a cake for a gay wedding. All of these dealt with ultimately in the background, what was really operable was the libertarian gift bag of lowering liability, having the free market economy flourish, having low taxes, having low regulation, and tort reform and local control. And that's what they did. They take every single issue. LGBT becomes about a business owner's right to make decisions about his business without being regulated and without being fined. Okay, so we took an issue which was about sexual morality and the harm that's done to people in a culture that is sexually decadent and where people are losing their dignity and all of a sudden relationships are becoming unstable. And we make the issue about businesses and what they want to do. So abortion becomes an issue about states not having federal oversight. That I think is part of the religious liberty trap. And unfortunately, I think that we're now a good 40 years into this movement away from defending our values to defending this idea that we should just have freedom, but it's not really freedom or protections for individuals. It tends to be freedom for institutions.
Yeah. Well, when you think about it, it's almost like the left and conservatives have switched argumentation, because it used to be that the left was just making just tolerance, just let us live our life and you live yours and whatever it is. And then conservatives, it was the Jerry Falwells and all of that were making the moral argument. They're like, no, we have to do this because this is what the Bible says. And now it seems like now the left, they're the ones that are making the moral argument. They're the ones that are saying, we have to do this because it's the right thing to do for women, or birthing people. They make these moral arguments, and then it's the right conservatives. We're like, no, this is procedural. We have to be tolerant. We just want to live our life. You live your life. I live my life. And this is the problem: is that both sides in both instances are talking past each other, because one is talking morality, one is essentially talking legislatively or just talking procedural, and everybody's talking past each other. And guess who was winning in both? The side that was pushing morality, not the side that was pushing procedural. Right. And this is where we and it's almost like it's a self-inflicted gunshot right now, because we're going the procedural route and we will lose. They're making the moral argument, and guess what? If they can convince, now what is it? Would you say 61% of women pro-choice, to be pro-abortion, to be pro-baby murder, we are losing that moral argumentation. We have to get back. We've got to fire with providing a superior argumentation on the moral aspects of pro-life cause, and that life begins at conception. We are losing it because we're refusing to even engage in the debate.
Right. And what's so sad is the the dissent by Kagan, Sotomayor, and Breyer, they were wrong because, they don't think that the unborn has rights, but they were the ones who said that the job of the Supreme Court and the Constitution is to have moral pronouncements. They were making an appeal to the importance of the federal government of moving us towards a moral society and addressing wrongs and injustices. And that's what's so sad, is that the left are the ones making that argument, and the right is the one that if you look at what religious liberty accomplished, it didn't. Here's the thing that to me is very disturbing. I feel like the donor class likes liberty. The donor class likes these religious liberty arguments because it means that their corporations now get all these protections. They can do what they want. If you look at sort of Burwell versus Wheaton College, what religious liberty did was it said that Christian colleges can't be investigated. They can hire and fire whoever they want for any reason whatsoever. And because they're Christian, no one can say anything. How does that help a Christian whistleblower in that college? And when that college gets taken over by liberals who are subverting the whole Christian mission, then the conservative whistleblower in the college can get fired and they have no recourse. And traditionally, that's what's happened. The conservative movement does not help whistleblowers from within conservative institutions, because that would mean siding with labor against management, which goes against the libertarian ethos, right? So this is the problem with the religious liberty trick. It doesn't help individuals. And I think working class and middle class conservatives have borne the brunt of cancel culture, because they don't have that protective buffer. They don't have the ability. They don't have tons of savings to fall back on. They can't just sort of miraculously come up with health insurance to feed their kids, right? And what the other thing is that the middle class and the working class, I think that they feel in a more direct way the harms of the breakdown of the family and the breakdown of integrity and morality in society. And so they want to talk about the people who are harmed by this. They want to talk about the toll emotionally and financially and socially this takes on families and on people when their network of social mores is breaking down. Whereas when we talk about religious freedom, we don't have to talk about the harms to these people. We're just talking in these, instead we're talking about, the executives of Hobby Lobby, they don't want to pay for contraception. And, they don't want to be associated with something. It's okay if they get contraception from somewhere else, as long as Hobby Lobby doesn't have to pay for it. That's not and I think that this decision, Dobbs, it really is part of that trend towards not really addressing the moral issues. It's always, as you say, process, it's procedure, it's that bag of cliches that we get from the libertarian class, which is basically tort reform, low liability, low regulation, states' rights, local, we don't want central government. And every moral issue becomes about that. That's what I feel like they did to the pro-life issue. All of a sudden, when was abortion ever about states' rights? It was about not freaking killing people. Like, that's what the pro-life movement, they wanted the people in their country to stop murdering babies. And somehow we got a court decision that was about state control. Or, yeah. It doesn't, and that's great for like the people who are in charge of Republican states, but that doesn't help. What about the Christians in California where you live? This decision really actually puts you in a worse position than you were in before in many ways.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Talking to Dr. Mark Sherwood, he made that we're probably going to actually see an increase in the total number of abortions happening in the country, because you're going to see a lot of the lefty states like Oregon, Washington, New York, California actually further loosen any restrictions that they might have on abortions, and actually welcoming in people from other states to come and actually get abortions. I wouldn't be surprised if we actually see an increase in abortions as a result of this decision, which I think it was a very interesting perspective that I hadn't really thought about till he brought that up. But also, one of the other things I want to talk about is that, to me, this decision shows how much of a failure the conservative Christians have been in this moral argumentation. So number one, we're getting into the point of where our Supreme Court is now saying that each state can decide whether or not they want to allow murder of innocent lives. So there's that. Then number two, it's like we're going to completely gloss over the idea of the morality that's laid out about marriage, about sex, sex and only between a husband and a wife. That's within those confines. Anything outside of that I don't care if it's straight, gay, whatever it is. Anything outside of the confines of a husband and a wife in marriage is a sin. Guess what? We wouldn't even be having this argumentation if people were living along with that standard, with that morality. Right. Because guess what? Right now, if you come out here to California, legitimately, everybody's sleeping with everybody. If you go up to Hollywood, it's rampant sex everywhere. There's abortions happening constantly. All the celebrities are coming out about how many abortions they've had, and they wouldn't be a famous actor if they hadn't had an abortion, and all this ridiculousness. Right. This shows to me Christian the moral argument, and we've completely conceded this to the left that it's everybody's having sex. It's what they're doing. Use protection, and guess what? If for whatever reason you get pregnant, they're abortion and whatever it is, guys. Sex is supposed to be between a husband and a wife within the confines of marriage. If we were actually sticking to that, this decision wouldn't even be relevant because we wouldn't be having this issue on such a rampant scale.
Yeah, well, and I think that you just put it perfectly. Like that, what you just talked about this is what defending moral values looks like. This is what defending religious freedom looks like. It's not the same thing. And so I think what conservatives have to do is every time they hear the spokespeople, the established people, from right-wing think tanks, etc., come to you and say, we're fighting for religious liberty, I think that your guard needs to go up, and you need to ask, are you defending my right to go and think differently from other people, or are you actually trying to protect vulnerable people from the harms that are done by immoral behavior and an immoral culture? Those are two very different things. And I think what Andrew Lewis, this one scholar, said really sums it up, that there was a decisive move over a period of about 20 years where conservatives, they stopped defending their values and they just kept on wanting to defend freedom. And ultimately that became increasingly about the freedom of corporations, the freedom of institutions, the freedom of the little sisters of the poor. And it wasn't really about protecting the freedom of individual working class or middle class Christians, because let's face it, those people don't get helped by anybody. And then in the end, the harms that are done by the breakdown of all this it's not even part of the discussion. They're not even talking about that anymore. And I think the liberals love this. I think the liberals really, this is the debate they want to have. They want to create this fake binary where abortion is about Christians and, their uptightness about not wanting to be associated with things they find distasteful, and liberals who are just defending women's rights. And it's not about the harms that are done. When you're talking about 60 million people have been erased from the national population over a period of 50 years, that's a harm. That's like a serious harm that we're feeling. Well, I really want to thank you for joining me, Jeff. And, we're going to keep in touch. And I don't know, hopefully you can be back on again soon. I think we're out of time, but it was a good discussion.
Definitely. Right? Definitely.